We are super excited to talk today about the idea of a leader being a coach. And in today's episode, we talk about the shifting dynamics in the workplace, how we can move from a more traditional style of leadership to a coaching-based approach. We give our own examples of how we've done that, along with some tips and practical advice on how to make that shift. We're so excited you're here today. Can't wait to get this conversation started.
I Could Talk to You All Day is a podcast about what it means to be a leader while also being human. I'm Lauren Lefkowitz.
And I'm John Spears, and we coach executives and leaders just like you about shifting from surviving at work and home to thriving in the life you've always wanted.
We're so glad you're here.
Let's get the conversation started. Yo, Lauren. That's not fair. You can't make a funny face that no one else sees it except for me when we start recording, and then I start laughing, and I look like a silly person. Hi, how you doing?
I can make
That's
all the
even
faces
better.
I want.
Maybe we should do a video podcast so people can see your silly faces. Those were really good.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm here all
A
week.
A plus, gold star for you.
This is our fourth attempt at recording this episode. There were tears on my end that led to a conversation that had us running out of time. There were tears on John's end that led to a conversation that had us running out of time. And there was a microphone malfunction. And so fourth time is a charm
Hopefully.
for today's episode.
Let's see if we can get through it. And this is also a reminder, the thing that I love about these conversations, Laura, so oftentimes, particularly as leaders, we're like meant to like have it all. We're meant to believe that we need to have it all together. And I have to believe that we're not very different from other people who have lots of stuff going on in their lives, challenges, setbacks, successes, and we're all experiencing that all the time. Oftentimes there's a duality of like happy, sad. And so I'm glad you mentioned that because like we're humans and we have
Yeah.
emotions and we have
Yeah.
experiences and sometimes it sucks and sometimes it's amazing and it's all a part of this human experience.
And that's like, if we go all the way back to when we started the concept of this podcast, it was for leaders who are humans, right? Like, you can't put aside your humanity and your vulnerability and just like lead as though nothing's going on in your life. Now, like, we've talked about in other episodes, like, it's not your role to bring to your subordinates problems you're having with your own boss, right? That stream goes up or over. But you are allowed to be a human being who says to your employees, like, I'm having a really hard day. How can we make my life a little bit easier today? What meetings can we move? Is it okay if we don't work on this today, if we push it back? And your employees typically are going to respect you for being a human being and not acting like a robot who is just here to get the work done and then leave for the day and then return tomorrow and do the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. This opening conversation is kind of a good segue into our topic. I didn't intend for it to be, but today we're talking about a leader being a coach. And I think we have seen a lot of really bad leaders, a lot of mediocre leaders, a lot of leaders who have really great technical or subject matter expertise, but aren't really good at the people side, at the emotional intelligence side. And I think with all the shifts that we're seeing in the workplace, in leadership, this idea of a leader being a coach and serving as a coach and a manager, more than just a manager to their team is so important. We have different managerial styles. We have Gen Z who needs a different type of leader, manager, coach. We have shifts that have come after COVID. We have this growing lack of trust in institutions, all of which are really putting lots of pressure on leaders and managers and organizations to be their best selves so that then their teams and their employees and the staff can also be their best selves and excel and ultimately at the end of the day have great impact, add to the bottom line, all that good stuff.
Every time you said best self, I cringed at it because the perception of best self to me, when we say it in the corporate environment, is like put on a happy face,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's this really like damaging, pretend everything's, but your best self, my best self, has human emotion, has interaction beyond getting the work done, and has days that are so bad that we can't get anything done and so good that like we don't want to. Let's go out and celebrate instead. And so this concept of best self to me is so cringy because it doesn't, what we mean in corporate when we say best self is a mask of what we mean in our regular lives, of how we show up for ourselves and each other.
Yeah. I totally get that. And I'm certainly not talking about like corporate robot best self. Like corporate robot, produce, produce, produce. Don't create any waves, just do what you're told to do. Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I think in this idea of coaching, and we do this in our own practice when we're working with clients, it's all about this ability for as us as a coach to generate and help generate awareness in our clients to unlock something new and spectacular, and this belief that the client or the team is resilient and has what it takes to do what needs to happen. And I think when I talk about best self, that's like that's what I'm talking about. I know you know that, but I think
Yeah, yeah.
you know it's really important to make that distinction because we're not talking about like best self corporate robot producer best self. We're talking about fully actualized. We're talking about someone who has confidence because they're trying things, they're learning, they're making mistakes, they're navigating, they're getting the experience that they need instead of, and we're gonna get to this in a minute, a manager in a very like hierarchical places, you micromanage, you do these five things and do it this way and you'll get it done. That doesn't really create space for a colleague to explore and to learn on their own and to inject their own creativity or expertise into the dynamic. And so um, I'm really glad that you made that distinction because that is 100% not the type of that like corporate robot producer best self is not what I'm going for.
Yeah, same.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea of leader as coach and kind of the distinction between how you see things shifting in the workplace from this more traditional leadership style, kind of top-down approach to a more coaching mindset.
Yeah, when I think of the leadership that I sort of grew up with in the corporate world, there was a lot of telling and correcting, and not a lot of asking me what I thought and asking me for my wisdom and my ideas. I learned how to become a leader by watching other people take a stand for themselves
Mm,
and say, wait, I have ideas. I have thoughts on this. Can I give an idea? Can I give some input on this? And that's how I became a good individual leader, was by sort of fighting the traditional way of what we used to call leadership, which I think included telling people what to do, corrective action, taking it over when it wasn't working. And that was sort of it, right? Like team meetings traditionally were, what are you working on? What do you need help on? Um, and that was the most coachy that it got. But the response from those more coachy questions was like doing and fixing and handling, and not, okay, what do you think about that? And I know we'll talk more about like how coaching is coaching versus, doing and telling. But I think now we're coming into an era, and some of this is thanks to Gen Z and the younger millennials who have really been willing to stand up and say, that's not how I want to work. Where I think Gen X and elder millennials were just told how things were and followed that, didn't like it, but developed some flexibility as leaders today to listen to the up and comers.
Hmm.
And so I think, we're coming into an era, and have in the last couple of years, of really a more collegial environment,
Yeah.
and really more listening, which I think is the start of coaching. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, let's take a big step back because I think what I did at the top was like, hey, there are these two styles. Let's talk about them. And I think when we're talking about what it means to be leader as coach, like what does that mean? And I think what I would say to that question is you have these more traditional leadership styles, like you said, that are very top-down, hierarchical, directive, directing people to do things, directing people to do things in a certain way. And I think when you look at, and that plays out a lot in one-on-one meetings or team meetings where things are very driven by the boss, the leader, the manager. And it's very much sort of like a one-way flow of communication towards the employee, the colleague. And I think when we're talking about leader as coach, we're talking about shifting that dynamic to a much more collaborative space of co-creation, of if an employee or someone says, "Hey, what should I do here?" Instead of jumping in to hero or to give direction, to really spend some time being curious about what's the challenge. Okay, like what are they experiencing in that challenge? Um, what is this really about? And so, shifting from a like problem solving approach all the time, which is something that, when I was managing a whole team and an organization, because of time, oftentimes found myself getting in that space. It's a very easy space to be in, but taking that step back and really exploring some of like what's actually going on here to then empower the the person to be able to like really go deeper and think about what are some ideas and generate some solutions on their own as opposed to someone always solving the problem for them. What do you,
Yes.
what do you think
That's
about kind of that distinction between leadership and coach, leader or manager and coach?
what I'm hearing you say, and what I've experienced as well, is that there's been like a parentification of leadership,
Such a good way to say
right?
it. Yes.
And it doesn't serve us in so many ways, because all of the pressures on the leader to solve for everything. All of the work becomes really reactive, right? We run into an uh-oh, and then everybody runs to the parent or the leader and says, "This is broken. How do we fix it?" And
Yeah.
we develop this like um, dependent cycle where there's not enough autonomy from the subordinate person, from the person reporting to the leader, to do anything or to learn anything. And so you're learning tactically if you're working in that environment. The opportunity, and what I've seen develop and what I've developed myself as a leader, and I know you have too, is if we're all really in it together, and we're not in it together to serve the leader, we're serving the purpose, we're serving the mission, the vision, the project, then we're really missing out on idea generation, on appropriate collaboration, on effective problem solving, on any kind of proactivity, if we're all sitting and waiting for mom and dad to solve our problems and to tell us
Yeah.
what to do. And it's really unsatisfying, I think, to be in an environment where you have this like bottleneck of, I have a problem and now I will sit and twiddle my thumbs until the parent comes back, the leader comes back and tells me what to do. Where I see like dynamic stuff happening is when we start trusting each other.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I think one of the foundations of coach in the workplace is developing that level of trust in the people that you work with.
Lauren, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, obviously you can't, leadership now doesn't just necessitate that you have one way of leading or managing all the time. So there is an appropriate time to be a coach. There's also an appropriate time based on the circumstances to be a manager and to give direction. How do you think about when to put on the coach hat and when to put on the more directive, managerial kind of leadership hat?
I think you have to, as leader, determine the distinction between what do I need to tell someone has to be a certain way, or what do they definitely not know, or pretty definitely not know, versus what are the opportunities for growth and ideation and all of that. And I think about with my own clients, I'm going to give an example that I run into a lot with my clients, which is when my client has a problem and they come to me and they say, my manager did this and I don't know how to handle it. I know that if I ask them some questions, they probably can come to the answer on their own and the how to handle it on their own. If I have a client who wants to network because they've been insular and they've worked only in their company and they want to get to know other people in their industry and they've never done that before and they don't have any idea how to, for me to say, what do you think is the best way for you to use LinkedIn to find networking opportunities? They don't have that answer.
Yeah.
So I think the baseline question is, what's the opportunity to get ideas from the employee and answers from the employee? And what's the necessity to give them answers so that then they can develop? Because those
Yeah.
same clients, when they come back to me, they're then talking about, oh, I networked this way, and then I learned some stuff from that person who I networked with, and now I have all these ideas for networking. But they needed the baseline instruction.
I think so. I'm sure there are people who are listening to this and are saying, "Oh my God, I'm a leader. I love this idea. I love this idea of infusing some coaching into my one-on-ones or with my team." But how do I do that? What does that look like? How do I go from urgency, problem solving, kind of solving things all the time to shifting more into this coach? What's required? What aspects, characteristics? And I would say to that question a few things. One is we talk a lot about curiosity in coaching, and I found that one of the skills that I think really learned from and was able to build on in my work is this idea of curiosity, of always being curious about what's happening and what the other person is saying. So if you're out there and you're a leader and you're wanting to infuse more coaching, I think curiosity is one of the most important components of this, of not just taking what someone is saying at face value, but really asking the right questions. And I think that's the second thing, is like asking questions, being really inquisitive. Okay, what's this about? Tell me more about it. And I love that question, tell me more, because it really oftentimes when I ask that first question, what's going on here? There's kind of the surface level, kind of 30-second kind of Cliff Notes version of it. And then when I say tell me more, it kind of opens up. It's like a really powerful question that opens up the other person to like go wherever they want to go, wherever whatever is present. It sort of comes out with that question. So this idea of curiosity, of being inquisitive, asking the right questions. And I think the last thing that I would say to someone before I ask you to kind of what else would be required is this idea of active listening, of not just hearing the words that are coming out of the person's mouth, but what's happening with their emotions? What is their tone? What is their body language? Really being able to hear what's being said and not just the words that are coming out of their mouth.
My version of that is say more,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so you can say it in whatever way it comes to you. I don't particularly like help me understand, because
Yeah.
that sounds to me accusatory.
Totally.
Like, why
Yeah.
the F did you do this way? Help me understand has seemed to turn into that. But tell me more or say more is so door opening. It doesn't lead you anywhere. It's just, I know you have more to say about this. And
Hmm.
I think one of the things you and I talk about so much is the trust factor. So when I say tell me more, I'm saying it to people who trust me. If I say tell me more and you don't trust me, then you're going to wonder what I mean when I say tell me more.
Hmm.
You're going to wonder what I'm looking for. And are you going to get in trouble if when I say tell me more, you say, I don't actually know what there is more of? You're going to think that I have this hidden agenda. So I think that level of trust is vital. And to build that trusting relationship and ask them, what do you think? Or let's look at this particular aspect. How has this particular aspect impacted you? What would you like to do with it? And I think, you said coming from curiosity, and I think that is the absolute key. Where do we come in with the really open mind that we don't have the answer and we're making them guess? We actually want them to be involved.
Yeah. And what would you say to a manager who wants to begin to use some coaching techniques in their one-on-one meetings with their team? Like, how would you, is there a framework that you like to use or some way to start that conversation? Yeah, give us some tips that you would offer some people as they're considering becoming more of a coach with their teams and their homes, like in any part of their lives, really.
The first step is put perfection aside. There is a perfect way in my mind how everything in the world works around me. It's not necessarily the right way. And a lot of times somebody else has a better way. But if I already have my mindset on perfection and my version of perfection, I'm out. It doesn't matter how I ask questions or what I ask. I'm going to end up eventually leading whoever I'm working with to what I think is perfect. The second thing is, like you said, listening. That is just so vital. Not coming up with your next question until you have listened. The third thing I would say is you don't have to have all the answers.
Totally.
Read books, talk to peers or those in other folks in leadership who know more than you, who you admire for their leadership, and ask them, I noticed you in this meeting and it was so great how you built this dynamic conversation and you really stepped aside. How did you do that? Get some advice. And then, as always, I'm going to say, have your own coach. Having the opportunity to be coached and be in the seat of somebody who is being coached and being asked questions to find the intelligence inside of themselves is so powerful.
I have a few things to add. One is you mentioned this, but I wanted to sort of really highlight it here in this sort of like these tips that we're giving people. One is you got to create a safe space where there's trust.
Yeah.
This is true in any sort of relationship, and particularly if you're going into moving into more of a coaching relationship with a colleague or a direct report. If there isn't trust to really for them to come to you with like everything that's going on, that not necessarily in their lives, but in the challenges with work or trying to get something done, there's no way you're going to be able to get to the root of what's happening if there isn't trust. So I think that's you said it. I want to highlight it. It's super important. Psychological safety in any relationship is the foundation for a healthy, vibrant relationship, whatever that relationship is and looks like. You also said something that don't start thinking about the next question until you've heard. Being present is so much more important. Being present in the here and now and being like locked in on the conversation without distractions is so important to any type of coaching conversation. Um, because oftentimes, if we're distracted, we're not really able to be present. We're not really able to hear what the other person is saying. And I have often in my life been like four steps ahead in my brain of the conversation. And it doesn't allow for the magic of coaching to happen or the magic of that conversation to really come to life if you're not kind of in it and present and really listening and hearing what the person is saying. So to the third thing that I would say is if you're making this shift from a more traditional style of leadership where you're being directive, I think it's really important to set expectations with the team about the shift that you're about to make. Because You've created a habit, a pattern, a dynamic, and you're going to want to disrupt that. And so, really being super clear about how one-on-ones are going to go, or about how your advice is going to go, or about how and when you're going to put on your coaching hat or put on your more directive hat, all super important for the team to be able to change and to shift with the dynamic that you're trying to create. And the last one is getting out of the habit of just solving the problem. And so instead of telling someone what to do, ask more questions, be inquisitive, pause before offering solutions. And I think those, in addition to those really great kind of practical suggestions that you provided, are really like a really easily stepping stone for someone to make this transition from a more traditional top-down hierarchical directive approach to more of a coaching dynamic with the team.
Yeah. And I want to make a point on the not having your next question ready and not preparing. I think there's an aspect as leaders that we have of that we get nervous,
Hmm.
especially if we're dealing with a hard subject or we're trying to correct the course that we're on. We may already have planned what we want to say, and the person we're talking to may surprise us with an idea or a thought or whatever. And we may hesitate to change our course because we've got it planned. We don't have to. We don't have to know the next question.
Yeah,
What haven't I asked is a great question. What else do you want to give me input on here? What should we be thinking about? Or why don't we come back to this after we've both had time to think about it? So you
totally.
get to decide to end the conversation for now or hand it back to the other person. You don't have to have all of the answers. And I think we forget that as leaders.
Totally. Before I offer a few resources for folks to check out, would love to hear what are your like one or two takeaways from this conversation?
We have an opportunity to change how we approach things all the time in every moment. And so I would say choose and choose and choose again. That's our opportunity. Choose to be coach. If you come into direct leadership and you realize that you want to course correct, you can say, let me take a step back. You
Yep.
haven't done it wrong. You're changing your habits. You're changing the way that you do things. So, like you said, informing your team that you're trying some new stuff, getting some advice, getting some input. How's this going for us? Right. And being willing to hear that feedback and then just keep choosing. How about you? Last thoughts?
Yeah, I think two things. One is I really love the start of the conversation where we made this distinction between best self and like corporate robot best self and real life best self. I think that's super important. And coaching really affords the opportunity for our team to be their best, to grow and to learn and to be innovative and to unleash their own greatness that not only like benefits them, benefits the team, benefits the company. I think that's such an important and powerful aspect of coaching. And the other thing, I'm really kind of just super present to this idea of being present and not having all the answers. And I think oftentimes what you said around sometimes leaders get scared to be a coach because they don't know all the answers. It puts them in this, instead of this hierarchical position, much more of a collaborative dynamic. And I think not knowing all the answers is so important in life. The older I get, the more I realize I don't know. And I found that to be true anytime I've grown in my job. Like the higher I've gotten, the less I know. And I think there's a real magic around that with a team to just to be honest about it and to put yourself in a position of being curious and asking powerful questions. I think it's magic. So for those of you who are interested in this idea of leader as being a coach, there are two resources that I absolutely love. I've used these in my when I was managing teams. I also use these resources in my coaching practice. The first is a book called The Coaching Habit by this author named Michael Bungay Stanier. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. It's a really quick, easy, short read. I love it. It has a bunch of sample questions. It talks about making a shift. Powerful, powerful tool if you're interested. The next is a Harvard Business Review article called Leader as Coach. Also, a really awesome resource, not very long to read. And these two things will really help, in addition to this podcast, help you take the step that you need to take to get to being a coach with your team. Lauren, I could talk to you all day. I don't know why these conversations go so fast. There's like so much more to say, so much more that we plan to talk about. I love having these conversations with you, and I wish we can do this more and more and more and more and more and more.
Me too.
Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next time.
We're so grateful you decided to be with us during this episode. Subscribe, rate, and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues, and join us next time for more Real Talk.